Making myself pretty for YouTube. Already filming. Yep. Hello, peoples. Welcome back. And welcome to the very first Fullmetal Friday. No, Wyan is not doing makeup tutorials. Wyan will never be that desperate for channel views. No. While browsing around the internet, I came across two discussions on Reddit, and two very creative and observant groups of fans there had compiled parallels between the homunculi of Fullmetal Alchemist and Dante's Divine Comedy and the divine judgment therein. I found the resemblances pretty striking, and the original posts by Honeybee Hound and Fullmetal 9780 were pretty brilliant. I'll link the posts in the description below. After reviewing all of the conversation and the replies, and reviewing some of the scenes of both animes, both 2003 and of Brotherhood, to draw my own conclusions, I've come up with my own take on the comparison. First off, in the 2003 anime, the mother, or the human who took charge of and initially created Envy, is named Dante. I don't think we can get any more blatant than that. Because the manga and Brotherhood were creator Arakawa's original vision and would therefore be more applicable if she had done it on purpose, and as much research as she did into multiple fields in order to make her manga, I'm quite certain she probably did. I'm going to focus most of the analysis on the homunculi of Brotherhood, but there will be something in there for you 2003 fans, because I'm not going to discount or ignore 2003 by any means, because some of the parallels I feel are drawn just as well. In the context of the manga and Brotherhood, we can notice that most of the homunculi's victims are almost always guilty of their respective sins, while the homunculi are then defeated by those who are either contrary to this sin or have overcome it throughout their trials. We'll start our analysis by looking at my personal favorite of all the homunculi, Gluttony. Gluttony is an interesting case because he never actually kills anyone, at least not in Brotherhood. In 2003, he kills and eats a waiter, and even though a waiter isn't really necessarily guilty of the sin of gluttony just because they serve food, Gluttony is not exactly a picky eater. He eats Father Cornello's body, but he was already dead. But Cornello was to a degree guilty of the sin of gluttony, not so much of food, even though he was one of the few fat characters in the anime, but in consuming power and resources in general. When Gluttony opens the portal in his stomach and swallows everything in its path, he sucks up Edward and Ling, both of whom are famous, or rather infamous, for overeating. In the Divine Comedy, the gluttonous were tortured by being consumed by Cerberus, the hellhound with the multiple heads. In the manga and Brotherhood, Gluttony was consumed by Pride after being pulled in by Pride's multiple hands as he screams in pain. In the movie conclusion of 2003, Conqueror of Shambhala, Gluttony's energy was consumed by the portal opened by Alphonse's transmutation. Second homunculus, Wrath. Wrath victims are the vengeful and short-tempered. The Chimera in the Devil's Nest plot anarchy as revenge against the government's experimentation on them, and as proven by kidnapping Alphonse and threatening to, quote, take him apart to learn his secret, they are more than willing to harm innocents to achieve their goal. Specifically Martel, who lashed out against Wrath personally, seeking to avenge greed. Then there's Fu, who was very short-tempered and harsh towards his granddaughter Lanfan. Wrath severely injures Lanfan, who was known to lash out violently at even the most minuscule threat against Ling, having held Edward at knife point for no greater crime than insulting the young lord. She also instigates the altercation between herself and May, while both were in the care of Dr. Knox. I'm pretty sure it probably runs in the family. Wrath inflicts psychological torment on Mustang, the man on a tireless mission to avenge his best friend, by reassigning his entire team, and also on the notoriously short-tempered Edward Elric by holding over his head a blatant threat against Winry. Sorry, you know I couldn't help it. You know I had to at some point. Come on. Ultimately, Wrath is defeated by Scar, who spent years of his life killing in the name of revenge against the state military for the genocide of his people, but overcame his hatred in light of the sympathy from Mei Chang's plight and experiencing Winry's compassion. Wrath's manner of death does not parallel the Divine Comedy as well with the other homunculi, but something that happens to Wrath in 2003 does. Embodied by a childlike form instead of the towering Emestrian overlord, Wrath loses 2 limbs when he escapes from the gateway. In the Divine Comedy, the Wrathful have their limbs torn from their bodies. Let's look away from the homunculi for a moment, and we can notice that this particular parallel can be drawn equally well with other characters. Most, if not all, of the characters who are missing limbs in either anime have some sort of anger issues and possibly even lose their limbs as a direct result of this. And we know that Edward is notoriously short-tempered, but he also has a prevalent resentment towards his father, blaming him for the death of the mother that he and Al tried to bring back, an effort that resulted in the loss of his arm and leg. Lan Fan, mentioned previously, was forced to amputate her own arm after an avoidable confrontation with Wrath. Scar, in 2003, loses both of his arms in his fatal and final attempt to cripple Amestus by completing the transmutation circle around Lior. We don't know how Captain Buccaneer lost his arm, but it was presumably in battle. He has a distinct affinity for violence and also meets his demise at Wrath's hand. The only character that doesn't fit the bill here is Pandinia, but she does harbor bitterness about the wreck that took both of her legs, both of her parents, and in 2003, also her arm. Homunculus number 3, Envy. Now, due to my personal headcanon that Envy is genderless, which I may discuss in a later video, I'm going to refer to Envy by a singular they, just letting you know that to avoid confusion. Envy kills differently than their siblings in the sense that none of their victims have really done anything wrong. The Ishvalan child, Mace Hughes, neither are applicable to their respective sin. In fact, Hughes specifically tells Mustang, "I don't envy you that," referring to his friend's position and responsibility, mostly concerning the Elric brothers. But unlike the previously listed sins, the sin of envy is not always blatant and volatile. Sometimes it uses seemingly innocent desires to manipulate us and drag us down, which may be why envy and lust get along so well. The manipulation is clearly seen in the case of Envy and Mei Chang. Mei is envious of Ling's status and power as the prince of her own clan, whereas her own clan is virtually powerless in the Empire. She knows from the very beginning that the Yao heir has a better chance of obtaining the Philosopher's Stone than she does, which is why she is so much more willing to go to underhanded methods to get it. Her dilemma on her way back to Xing gives Envy just the window they need to manipulate her into returning them to Amestris, where they are able to quickly restore their power. Dante's comedy punishes the envious by burning away their eyes, as Mustang does to Envy multiple times throughout the final confrontation. But unwilling to allow themselves to be killed by one of the humans who revealed them as weak and pathetic, they commit suicide. But rather than Envy having been defeated by someone who overcame the respective sin, the divine judgment that should have been Envy's backlashes onto Mustang, who was later rendered blind. In the movie conclusion of 2003, Conqueror of Shambhala, Envy was captured and killed by those who had not overcome their respective deadly sin, but rather were eventually undone by it. The sin of envy is characterized by the belief that one should rightfully possess something that someone else has, and the subsequent desire to obtain it. And the Thule Society feels just this way about the power of Shambhala. This leads to Chairwoman Eckart's demise, and she ends up being shot by the parallel doppelganger of Envy's previous victim, Maze Hughes. I've been talking for a really long time, and I want to keep these videos short enough to be interesting, but long enough to be informative. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off right here. And next week on Fullmetal Friday, we'll discuss the remaining 4 homunculi. So, thank you, peoples, for watching the very first Fullmetal Friday. I am YN, and I will see you next week for the continuation of this analysis, or tomorrow on the Saturday Showdown.